In 1997, the blockbuster film The Titanic was released, a work of art so beloved by its fans that it overshadows the despicable conditions the cast endured. During the creation of the iconic sinking scene alone, several actors suffered injuries ranging from broken bones to ruptured organs. 60 to 80 cast members even got poisoned during a cast dinner. Despite these terrible acts, the studio behind this film, Paramount Pictures, managed to single-handedly carry the sales of the film business this year, leading the box office by more than 65%. 7 years earlier, Nintendo was in much the same position, carrying the entire video game industry on its back. At a time when games and their marketing were incredibly disingenuous, and bootleg cash grab knockoffs of popular games were running rampant, Nintendo's official seal of quality let you know that you were going to get a satisfactory product. Unlike their competitors, Nintendo didn't bait players with beautiful box art that didn't represent gameplay at all. Due to the disingenuous marketing, the US gaming industry was at risk of all-out collapse and was on the fringe of disappearing entirely. Because of the unstable nature of the industry at the time, Nintendo and other companies were forced to closely guard their IPs in order to prevent bootleg versions of their flagship games from ruining their name. This allowed them to ensure that when consumers saw Mario on a box, they had some idea of what they would get. This strategy worked wonders at the time and led to Nintendo controlling 90% of the industry. Times change, however, and now the video game market is no longer on the fringe of collapse due to some teenagers creating a knockoff version of Mario in their garage. Modern gamers that want to play fan projects almost certainly know that they were not created by Nintendo, meaning the value originally presented by such a strategy is negated. You could even argue that this is counterintuitive, as the company's stake in video games has plummeted, leaving them with just 29% market share. Despite this clear shift in gaming culture, Nintendo continues to guard their IPs like they are some sort of divine entity, completely disregarding the consumers of their games. Nintendo shuts down projects that take years to create for the simple reason that they have the legal right to do so. In 2015, Royston Ross, a talented indie developer, released a remake of the first level of Super Mario 64 using modern graphics, which he then put out as a free download online. The game had none of the original objectives, and all you could do was run around and jump on Goombas. This, however, was enough to frighten the corporate minds at Nintendo, who promptly sent out a DMCA to their entire game. If you so much as mention Nintendo's characters, they will happily remind you of copyright law and force you to shut down your project. PokéNet, an MMO version of Pokemon, and Zelda Maker, a Mario Maker type game but for Zelda, have also been taken down by Nintendo's hand. This wouldn't be so bad if they acted as direct competition to Nintendo's own offerings, but the company has taken no action to create these types of games for their consumers. In similar Sega fashion, they take the opposite approach from Nintendo, and instead of chastising and punishing their fans for creating new and modified versions of their games, they instead offer them jobs. This practice allowed them to create what many fans consider to be the best Sonic game in history in Sonic Mania, the highest rated Sonic game in 25 years. The game started as a fan project before being officially published by Sega in 2017. Microsoft, the creator of the Xbox, has a similar experience surrounding some hackers that were able to mod their Xbox One systems. Instead of attacking and suing them, they chose to hire them to help improve the security of the system. Instead of utilizing the talent and passion that some of Nintendo's fans have, they instead attack and issue legal notices to them for daring to use their IPs in a free game. Not only does Nintendo attack small, independent developers, they also shut down competitive tournaments that feature their own games. In late 2020, a long-running Super Smash Bros. Melee tournament called The Big House was shut down because it utilized a mod named Slippy, which was created to allow online play when it didn't have it previously. In fall 2021, a Super Smash Bros. Brawl tournament titled Riptide was cancelled just 2 weeks before the event due to the use of a mod named Project Plus. Both Slippy and Project Plus require a legal copy of the game to use, so piracy wasn't even an issue. A prominent Smash player known as Hungrybox had this to say about the cancellations. "This is unforgivable at this point. There's no legitimate reason for Nintendo to do this that doesn't include a complete disconnect with the current culture of their consumers. Insanity." More recently, a large gaming convention called EVO, or Evolution Championship Series, had to drop Super Smash Bros. Ultimate because of a Nintendo-issued cease and desist. Many companies would kill to get a competitive scene like Nintendo's Super Smash Bros. The company behind the game, however, chooses to castigate its most passionate players for competing and enjoying games that they created. Basically, every other big-name game company pours thousands and even millions of dollars into prize pots for tournaments, as they understand that a strong competitive scene generally correlates to a strong overall community. Meanwhile, members of the Super Smash Bros. Community have to act graciously to be allowed to compete at all. The reason behind the attack on tournaments is still unclear, but we can speculate that it has something to do with Nintendo's obsession with their family-friendly image. They most likely believe that having their names associated with esports is bad for their brand. This is clearly outdated, yet Nintendo refuses to allow a community that has played their game for more than 20 years to prosper, not only giving zero money to the competitive scene, but actively trying to prevent its existence in the first place. Preventing the use of Slippy makes it impossible to play the game during lockdown. The assault on their fans set the tone for Nintendo's treatment of its players during the pandemic. Instead of helping their consumers through the virus, they instead capitalized on their misfortune, which boosted their profits all throughout the pandemic. At a time when their community needed them most, instead of assisting them through hardship, they instead released half-baked games to capitalize on their fans who are stuck inside. The company posted a round of knockout earnings and raised its profit forecast, showing that a surge in demand caused by the coronavirus pandemic is not wearing off quite yet. Annual profit for the Japanese version of Super Mario Maker and Pokemon totaled a record 480.4 billion yen, $4.4 billion, up from 258.6 billion yen the year before the results. Experts say they didn't expect such good fortune to persist through the fiscal year, which ended in March 2022. It's forecasting a 29% drop in profit to 340 billion yen, or $3 billion. Alongside the releases of previously mentioned games, Nintendo published Animal Crossing New Horizons at a retail price of $60. This was easily one of the most influential games of the year. It did, however, have a secret. It was not yet finished. Despite its lack of content at launch, Nintendo promised updates to fill out the rest of the game in the coming year. While profits were high, they released an unfinished game, taking advantage of their consumers' unfortunate circumstances. Companies like Sony and Microsoft put out games in a more complete state this year. This practice doesn't bring controversy to the companies and lets consumers get a full product when the game is launched. Sony released massively popular titles during the pandemic like Spider-Man Miles Morales and The Last of Us Part 2. These games were all, excluding a few bugs, completed and included almost all major content. Microsoft's big titles this year were Ori and the Will of the Wisps and Halo Infinite. The price of Sony and Microsoft's games were much lower than Nintendo's, with Ori and the Will of the Wisps and Spider-Man Miles Morales both being priced at only $29.99. These games were well received by all and have yet to take any major backlash. On top of capitalizing on the increased demand during the pandemic, the company also artificially lowers the supply of their retro consoles, superficially rising the demand for them in the short term. The lower production of the retro devices allows them to charge a higher price for machines that are essentially just emulators of a small number of classic games. Instead of making it easy for their customers to play their older titles, they lower the production of their emulators, driving up the price artificially. $5.28 million SNES Classic consoles were sold in its lifespan, which is pretty impressive considering they were only in production for 2 years. During this time, the creation of these consoles was intentionally slow on Nintendo's part, allowing them to lower the supply of these consoles, making them in the mind of consumers some sort of special edition console. At the time, the SNES and NES Classics were the only available options for players to get access to any of Nintendo's retro libraries legitimately. While this increases their contribution margin, it also hurts their customers who just want to play their favorite games. It seems like Nintendo actually intentionally makes it difficult to access their retro titles. Recently, Nintendo has been vigorously attacking emulation, which allows players to play older games even without access to the original hardware, which may be unattainable in the future. They argued that the emulation was allowing people to play illegal copies of their games, causing them to lose revenue. This would have been more convincing if they themselves didn't use emulation. Even worse, they use emulation to generate revenue as opposed to public emulators, which are often just projects created by fans to allow the preservation of retro titles in the future. In September of 2021, Nintendo released their own emulated offerings of popular N64 games via their Nintendo Switch Online service. On top of the emulation not being that good, these games came at an additional $30 every month. Furthermore, there weren't even that many games, and Nintendo spoon feeds us a few games a month, forcing us to wait for weeks, months, or even years to access our favorite games. If Nintendo wants people to legitimately play their titles, they need to make it possible for their consumers to get the games in the first place. Moreover, if you don't want people to emulate your games, then don't give them a reason to do so. Make it a better experience for them to play retro games on your console. With all those factors in mind, it's fair to compare Nintendo to some sort of cult, with their fans being their loyal apostles. It seems like no matter how many egregious acts the company commits, Nintendo's followers defend them religiously. Nintendo has the most loyal player base of any video game company to date, possibly stemming from the rescuing of the video game industry in the 80s and 90s, but instead of returning their passion, they continuously punish them for enjoying their games, even going so far as to shut down non-profit tournaments and projects surrounding their precious IPs. How dare we lowly mortals think about touching Nintendo's dear IPs? In the end, Nintendo is just a company. Just like every other gaming company, they have a legal team and threats to their intellectual property, but no other gaming company chooses to utterly destroy them like Nintendo. In this case, change can only be brought on by the Nintendo fandom. If we truly want Nintendo to change how they treat their disciples, then first, they need to change how they treat Nintendo. Thanks for watching.